For Bilkis Bano, a young pregnant woman who was gang raped and who had to witness, among other heinous crimes, the murder of her 3-year-old daughter, today has been a big win in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has basically scrapped the decision by the Gujarat government to release 11 men who were found guilty of both gang rape and murder. These convicts had walked out contentiously to being treated almost like heroes. They were garlanded, they were given mithai and sweets. There was a huge debate as to how this could possibly have been allowed to happen. The Supreme Court, in its verdict today, spoke about how the Gujarat government had been complicit in the petitioner's attempt to mislead the Supreme Court. It basically struck down an earlier judgment by the Supreme Court saying that that order had been obtained based on the suppression of facts and the misrepresentation of facts. Remember, it was here at the Mojo story that one of the members of the Gujarat panel that recommended the release of these convicts had described them to be, quote unquote, sanskari Brahmins, men of good culture who effectively deserved kindness and freedom. The Supreme Court today said that the very grounds on which the Gujarat government had decided to release them were weak in law, and the Gujarat government did not even have jurisdiction to take this decision. Joining us in the program now is senior advocate Vrinda Grover. She was one among India's top lawyers who appeared for the petitioners. Congratulations to you, Ms. Grover. It's a big win for you, a big win for Bilkis, and dare I say, a big win for India's women.
Yes, Barkha, I think it's a very, very important judgment, and it has reaffirmed that rule of law is the central pillar of Indian democracy, and that justice for women will be integral for the court to determine what is due process and how rule of law is to be interpreted. And Barkha, you yourself as a reporter have covered now for decades. I think another important point that the court makes here is the scathing indictment of the state of Gujarat, and to say that they have acted in complicity and in tandem with convicts, and recalling the reasons why, in the first place, the Supreme Court had transferred the investigation as well as the trial. And I think all those are very, very important markers of this judgment.
In fact, the verdict, ma'am, argues or actually says in conclusion that the Gujarat government may have acted in accordance with what the Supreme Court said, but the government went against the spirit of the law. That's one of the lines in the judgment. And the other point that is made is about misleading the Supreme Court with a suppression of facts and a misrepresentation of facts. Can you explain to the audience how the Supreme Court has found that the Gujarat government was guilty of that?
The Supreme Court has very categorically and in a reasoned order said that this was a fraud that was played upon the court. What had happened was that one of the convicts had approached the High Court of Gujarat and said, I would like to move a remission application because I've now served 14 years. And we must remember that these are convicts who were convicted by a special court in Mumbai, a conviction upheld both by the Bombay High Court as well as the Supreme Court for 14 counts of murder, gang rapes, including rape of a pregnant woman, as well as murder of infant children. And this was during the course of the targeted violence against Muslims in 2002, when Bilkis and her family were on the run from their village. One of them moved the Gujarat High Court. Gujarat High Court very clearly, relying upon a constitution bench judgment of the Supreme Court, V. Sriharan, said the appropriate government is not the Gujarat government. The appropriate government to determine whether you should receive remission or not will be state of Maharashtra, because your sentence was delivered by a court in Mumbai. Thereafter, that there was no appeal ever filed against that order. And the Supreme Court says so very clearly that that order has attained finality, and that order is in accordance with Section 432 7 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, as well as the Constitutional Bench judgment of the Supreme Court. Regardless of that, an Article 32 petition then comes to be filed in the Supreme Court of India saying, please ask the state of Gujarat to decide my remission application. And this is where the court, an earlier bench of the Supreme Court, which gave the order of May 2022, the Supreme Court says facts were suppressed. They were not informed of what had happened, what the High Court had said, and the state of Gujarat kept a complicit silence. And the court said, oh, this remission application should be decided. The law of the land is that it should be the policy of the time when you're convicted, so in accordance with 1992. And now the state of Gujarat comes in this particular round, and we should also remember, Bilkis was not made a party. So there were only two parties before the court at that time, the convicts and the state of Gujarat. Who owes a duty? Everybody owes a duty to the court, but definitely there was a duty of the state of Gujarat to tell the court that there was suppression of material facts and a fraud was being played upon it. The state of Gujarat not only kept silence then, it kept silent later, and then said, oh, we just acted upon an order of the Supreme Court and looked at the 1992 policy, and lo and behold, everyone was granted en masse remission. That very man, Radhe Shyam, had in the meanwhile, after getting a negative verdict from Gujarat High Court, which said go to Maharashtra, had actually moved a remission application in Maharashtra. And in Maharashtra, many of the authorities, including the special judge, including the CBI, had said he should not be granted remission. So now that the remission was not working out in Maharashtra, you come to the Supreme Court, play a fraud upon the court. The state of Gujarat remains meekly silent, and then there is a remission. And now all these facts unfold, and therefore I'm saying, I'm reading from the judgment where the Supreme Court today has said, instead the state of Gujarat has acted in tandem and was complicit with the petitioner respondent number 3 herein with what the respondent had sought before this court. This is exactly what the court had apprehended at previous stages of this case and had intervened on 3 earlier occasions in the interest of truth and justice by transferring the investigation of the case to the CBI and the trial to the special court in Mumbai.
Yeah.
So this is how they have said state of Gujarat had no authority, it lacked jurisdiction, it had no competence. It could not have passed these remission orders, and therefore they have been quashed, and the convicts have been asked, all 11 of them, have been asked to return to prison within 2 weeks.
Now, I have a question for you. Given that Maharashtra has been established as the state with the jurisdiction, and the court says that Gujarat never had jurisdiction, are you worried that there could yet be reprieve for these convicts down the road? The judgment very clearly says that the judges wrestled with the question, now that these men are out, can they send them back to jail? One of the conclusions they come to is that to apply properly for remission, they have to apply to Maharashtra, and for that they have to be in prison. So in any case, they have to go back to prison. So, but are you worried that down the road, there could be a similar decision as was taken by Gujarat? Question 1. Question 2, our colleagues found on the ground in 2022 that many of these convicts had simply gone missing. Nobody knew where they were. The lawyers have, of course, given an undertaking that if there's an adverse judgment, they will surrender. But are you worried that they might not?
Let me put it a little differently. I think what we need to see is every convict has a right to apply for remission after the mandatory period is over. What I would think would happen is that the state should act in accordance with law. And I think that is what is the underlying comment here. What we are seeing today is that the state is defiant. The state is breaking the rule of law and is in breach of the rule of law. And that is why courts are having to intervene in this manner. They have a right to apply. How is that remission to be processed? If the special judge and the CBI and others are giving adverse orders, are those simply to be set aside and only the orders that please you should be given? Is the central government simply to put a one-line stamp without looking at the nature of the offense or anything else? Surely the public speak of the central government and what the central government does in its capacity while endorsing the state government's remission will have to have some synchronization here. Thirdly, the court has also said power is not to be exercised arbitrarily. How is that power to be exercised of remission? Which will be the relevant policy in Maharashtra is not the one in Gujarat. And what considerations will flow? I would imagine that now that there have been, the court has very clearly spoken and asked the state that you are not here to be complicit with convicts of a heinous offense, but to act in accordance with law. We can only hope that the state government will act in accordance with law, and we do have the assurance that the courts will intervene if injustice of this nature follows. I also want to just pause here for a minute and say, let us not, even for a moment, forget that this long, very, very long, very, very arduous, and extremely difficult battle that Bilkis Bano and her family have undertaken. I think courts, uh, all of us, India as a society, polity, courts need to understand that this is what seeking justice for a woman entails, especially when you are against very powerful people. And we see this happening even in today's India.
I don't know if you've had the chance to speak with Bilkis Bano personally, but I was speaking with Shobha Gupta, who's been her lawyer for many years, and she said Bilkis cried. She said, I was on a video call with her. Bilkis heard the judgment and she cried. She said, but this time the tears were of relief. But you're right. While we discuss the technicalities, we must pause and think of what this woman has gone through as a young pregnant woman, watching her daughter being murdered, watching her mother being raped, being gang raped herself. I remember meeting her all those years ago with one arm fractured because she was pinned to the ground as she was raped. And again and again and again, she has gone back to the Supreme Court, eventually getting justice. And while there is something powerful in the reaffirmation of justice, no woman should have to go through what she's gone through.
Absolutely. And you were saying, will these people disappear? Will they go underground? I'm told state of Gujarat and the central government is a very strong government. I'm sure they'll find them.
I want to talk a little bit about the focus on rule of law in the judgment. It's very interesting. It talks about rule of law means whenever and wherever the state fails its duty, the court must step in. And in another portion of the judgment, the judges say that irrespective of whether there is, I think the phrase is, we must be unruffled and unmindful, even if ripples are created because of our decisions. What is the larger message that the court is delivering in this verdict?
I think, Barkha, what we are witnessing here, see, the judicial record is also a sort of, judgments are a sort of record of our history. And we know that in 2002, there were petitions moved. The NHRC also came before the Supreme Court. Transfers took place. The Bilkis case was one of them, as were many others. And that judicial record tells its own story of how marginalized, targeted populations, particularly in this case the Muslim minority, had to repeatedly turn to the court. We have seen an overwriting, a rewriting in the political sphere, in the social sphere, even erasure of crimes. And I think what the court is saying, that regardless of all that, and whoever may come to power or may not come to power, what the electoral ballot victories are separate. But when it comes to injustice, whether you're powerful, whether you're in power, whether you're aligned to somebody in power, whether you are welcomed as heroes, and whether the state keeps quiet and does not inform the court of relevant facts, courts have to ensure that both justice is done and the record speaks to the truth.
Finally, I know I've asked you this before, but because I know it will come up, there are many who will say to you, Vrinda Grover, when Nirbhaya happened, you did not want a death sentence for the men who had been convicted for that heinous gang rape. In this case, you have argued against the philosophy that these convicted rapists also deserve a chance at rehabilitation, a chance at a different life. If somebody were to say to you, you have been contradictory, you would say what?
I have actually not argued against remission. I would never argue against the philosophy of remission or against the philosophy of reformation. I have argued, and I always will, say that the state cannot be complicit in joining hands, and the court has upheld that, in joining hands with those who are convicted of heinous offense. The state has to be even handed. The state cannot decide certain people will be favored with the protection of law. Some will be will override the law, and others will not even be given basic protection in accordance with law. The state has to act in an even hand, and if the state will not uphold the rule of law, it is incumbent on us as lawyers, as citizens, to approach constitutional courts and seek justice. I am not against remission. Remission should be granted to all, but I am against a system where, for heinous crime like gang rape and murder, some are hanged, some are welcomed and given remission, others are given life sentence. As a citizen and as a lawyer, I want to understand what is equal protection of law and equal treatment in the eyes of the law. And I want to only say what the court has today told us. We are all equal, and the court has reminded the state of its solemn duty of upholding the rule of law.
Finally, what will happen now? There is a 2-week time frame for these 11 convicts to surrender, to submit before law. There has been a scathing indictment, as you pointed out, of the Gujarat government. These decisions, however, also don't necessarily cast a great light. I mean, they read down an earlier decision by the Supreme Court. There was an entire process that was followed here by the Gujarat government before these men were let out. What happens immediately? What should happen and what will happen in the next, let's say, 4
What will happen is that they should be asked, they have been directed to surrender, and that's what they should do. And the state of Gujarat should ensure, as it is their only duty to ensure, that a judgment of the Supreme Court is enforced. What I do think we'll imagine is a flurry of petitions. I mean, these convicts were represented by many councils, as they have a right to, and I'm sure there will be a flurry of petitions being filed to somehow ensure that they don't have to go to prison, whether it is reviews, etc., much will happen. But I do hope that this time round, the state will be standing with the rule of law and those deserving of justice.
Vrinda Grover, thank you. And if there's anything I think almost everybody should agree on, irrespective of political affiliation, is that a woman called Bilkis Bano deserves to spend the rest of her life with a sense of both security and justice, and not having to devote the remaining years of her life fighting for that justice. Thank you very much, ma'am.
I want to add my salutations to Bilkis Bano and all the activists who have stood by her through these years.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, ma'am, for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mojo Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.